Very alert and very involved citizens. Elizabeth Anderson reports the residents of Boyle Heights are very proud of their heroic efforts.
25 to 30 attacks. The latest victim, a 35-year-old man.
Los Angeles today, the man police call the Night Stalker was formerly charged.
Is described as white, 25 to 30 years old, with a predominant feature of badly stained teeth.
They are a product of the times, and these are bloodthirsty times. Even psychopaths have emotions if you dig deep enough, but then again, maybe they don't.
Doesn't make any substantial efforts to choose a victim and then do whatever it takes to enter. He seems to enter whenever entry is easy.
It's a haunting feeling to imagine that you could go to sleep at night to being woken up from a person storming into your bedroom, shooting your husband, and making the next small amount of time you have left a complete nightmare. If you're the wife that sadly is not the one that's killed, your brain never has time to understand what's truly going on. It's so terrifying to know that someone is out there that hasn't been caught, that's living around you, breaking into homes. The situations that Richard Ramirez put his victims through are undescribable when it comes to the word of terrifying. But also what Richard did to his victims will also lead to him being caught and put in prison for the rest of his life, evading the death chamber. Richard had two parts of his life: the man that became a terrifying killer, and the prisoner who became a sexual icon for women, building up an allegiance of girlfriends, marriages, broken hearts that lead to a slew of talk shows capitalizing of women fighting on national television, saying that they were Richard's girlfriend or wife or fiancé, standing outside the courthouse, the jail, whatever it took to get a glimpse of Richard. But the next and big part of his life, being captured by the public, incarcerated, would just be the beginning to another story that would unfold right in front of us.
Happy today and very, very proud to have married Richard and to be his wife. And I hope that you will be very respectful of the day.
When we dip into Richard's life, it's August of 1985. His last break-ins would be back-to-back. He's been murdering, stealing, torturing, assaulting, and being the villain for some time now. Starting with the last few murders of Richard, he finds himself on the 8th of August. He does his same routine, breaks in through the window in the middle of the night, shooting the husband while he's sleeping in his bed, waking his wife to her being dragged out of her bed, seeing her husband shot, Richard yelling, wanting to know where jewelry and where the money is in the house. He then assaults the woman, making her swear to Satan, telling her to be quiet while Richard had his way with her. Her 3-year-old son walks into the room. Richard ties the child up, then continues to assault the woman. Unusually, he lets them live, maybe showing some compassion, some would say. Compassion for Richard. He spends time at the home, even taking a melon and eating it right in the kitchen. But what compassion he had to not kill the mother and son wouldn't last long. On the 18th of August, days later, Richard was watching the news and knowing that authorities were on to him. They were piecing things together very fast. But the more break-ins and murders that Richard did, he was becoming more sloppy. So with this, he changed his hunting grounds. He drives to San Francisco. He breaks into the Pan home, shooting the husband dead in the head while he's sleeping in his bed. The wife wakes up to a mess, hearing what's taking place, screaming. Richard beats her and assaults her, ending her life. Then takes her lipstick and draws above their bed a pentagram. In it, saying Jack the Knife. The crime scene was a mess and disturbing when it was found. He also leaves a shoe print that would be used against him in court later on. Richard stays around the area for a few days till he heads back to South Los Angeles in a bright orange Toyota he just stole. On August 25th, Richard finds himself at a random house that he's looking to break into. As he's walking around the house making noise, he's heard by the family's 13-year-old son, James, sees Richard and runs to tell his parents in their bedroom of what's happening. They jump up, turn on all the lights, But James steps outside into his garage, coming face to face with Richard. For whatever reason, Richard himself becomes spooked and doesn't attack the young boy. Richard runs to his car, speeding off. But also, the young boy will remember the license plate number along with the car. The parents call the police, and with that tip, authorities notify the media, and soon enough, all of Los Angeles is looking for the orange Toyota with the license plate number attached to it. It's a bad situation for Richard, but one last crime would take place that same night. Whether it was an act for need for money, gratification, or impulse, Richard breaks into a home of a young couple. Finding a weakness in the back door, he gets it open and walks right into the home while the couple is asleep in their bed. He shoots the man 3 times with a .22 right in the head. While he laid there asleep, the young woman beside him, his fiancée, wakes. Richard pulls her out of bed, yelling at her, saying, "I am the Night Stalker. I want you to say that you love Satan." While she chanted this over and over for Richard, he beat her with a closed fist, then tied her up with her fiancé's ties. He drags her to the next room and assaults her, then wanting money from the home. Before Richard left, he knew the police were looking for him and that he had grown much popularity throughout the community. And now loving the attention, he told the young woman, "Tell them the Night Stalker was here." He then leaves quietly. Amazingly, the couple will both live. At this point with Richard, he's breaking into a home on a weekly basis. He soon abandons his new orange Toyota that police are looking for. He would wipe down the car, trying to get rid of any fingerprints, but missing one, and that's all it took. As police dig through the car, they find just what they need when it comes to prints. As they take images of the fingerprints and scan them, they come across a face and a name. A previous mugshot in 1984 for auto theft, Richard Ramirez'S face comes right up. His face is now plastered everywhere, TV, flyers, everywhere, so people know that police believe this is the Night Stalker. Looking for any information, reward, whatever it takes. As the city looks for Richard, it doesn't take long before they find him. But Richard, he lays low. He knows his face is out there, but still not quite aware of how many people are looking for him. On August 30th, he takes a bus to Tucson, Arizona, to see his brother and spend the night with him. This is a crossroads for the story. Richard never finds his brother. If he did, his brother might have been aware and suspicious throughout the day as news channels continue to play images of the crime scenes and Richard's face. But Richard, not watching TV, also could have easily escaped to a different location, and who knows how long the story may have lasted while Richard was on the run. But he finds himself alone and bored, with his brother not home. This would be Richard's last full day free. The next day, he takes the bus back home. As he comes back into the city of LA, his face is on every newspaper and television. The whole city's looking for him. When he arrives in LA midday on the 31st, police are waiting at every bus stop and at the one Richard arrives at himself. He can see them while on the bus. He lowers the bill of his hat and walks off the bus, not being seen, sticking in a crowd. He then walks over to a little shop, walks inside. As he walks in, he sees his face on the magazines and newspapers. His actual face. Richard becomes worried. Then, a group of women see him as he's looking at the newspapers. The women scream, knowing that they're in front of the man everyone's looking for. Richard runs out of the store panicked, running across a nearby highway into a nearby street. He starts trying to steal cars. He sees a woman sitting in her car, runs over to her, starts hitting her and pulling her out of the car. She struggles and screams, but her husband hears her and runs out. The husband starts hitting Richard in the back of the head with a lead pipe. Richard falls to the ground, bleeding, dazed. Neighbors nearby hear the commotion. They run over, helping their neighbor. They soon notice who the man is laying on the ground bleeding. It's the Night Stalker everyone's looking for. It soon turns into a mob of people. The authorities are called, and they hold Richard put. These are the first images that are seen by the world of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. He's been robbing and committing atrocities through California for months. It's almost as if Richard was looked at as a mysterious mythological creature that people had only seen sightings of, but now that they had found it, they were amazed by what it looked like. But as Richard is caught, another story will start to evolve. He starts his court cases. The media is going wild over the young chiseled chin serial killer. Richard makes the press all more crazed when he's in the courtroom, yelling "Hail Satan." And with that, something starts to happen and starts to appear from the crowds that want to see the Night Stalker. It's women, a lot of women. Really, this has never been seen since Ted Bundy, but even Bundy couldn't draw this amount of attention. Richard would attract large numbers of women that are blushing over him. Richard's family is also in the courtroom. His sister is a spokesperson for the family. Richard's brother is also seen, even at one time, upset and threatening the media when they yell questions at him. Richard's mother sits in the courtroom, even making eye contact with her son, at times where the two of them are seen looking at one another. His family is shocked by what he has done, and they simply can't give any answers. His days in court are numbered with the amount of evidence that's attached to him, and really it seems that no one even cares about the evidence. While he's in the middle of his case, he's receiving large amounts of letters, pictures of nude women, and women that are yelling at him, begging to meet him, and to supply him with whatever he needs, and some asking to marry him, also wanting Richard to mail them his seed so he would be able to impregnate women that were wanting it. On September 20th, 1989, Richard was convicted of every charge that was given to him. Then, on November 7th, for his penalty, he was sentenced to the gas chamber. Richard replied, "Big deal. Death always went with terror. See you in Disneyland." The quote made massive headlines. At the time, the Night Stalker trial would cost almost $2 million to hold, making a record at that moment. Richard talks to many girls. Some of them he talks more to than the other one, leading them on, getting what he can from them, supplies, or simply just special request favors of their clothing in the mail. Some of the girls become extremely obsessed with Richard, fighting over him, on occasions running into each other in public, smacking, pushing. As it continues, the public starts to see this well after Richard is convicted. Richard even scares a few of the women away when they meet him for the first time, even though they've been mailing letters back and forth to each other for months or even years. One in particular says that when she met Richard, he exposed himself to her, scaring her, showing Richard who he truly was, and maybe that he just wasn't the nice guy that so many women had portrayed him as. In the letters Richard wrote back and forth to women, many of them are vile, descriptive of what Richard wanted from each of them, what he would do to them if he could. Still to this day, there are thousands of love letters in circulation from many of Richard's admirers. With the Night Stalker case being wrapped up, news media outlets are still wanting to cover anything they can with Richard Ramirez. It's big money, it's big news, it captures people's attention. They start to find the women he was talking to, or even going so far to say the ones he was dating. The numbers are staggering of how many women were talking to Richard, even so much so that one of the jurors of his own case would become obsessed with Richard and become one of his girls for a small amount of time. Some of the women end up on talk shows arguing with other women that say Richard loves them more. It's almost as if Richard helped the start of TV shows that would display guests fighting and arguing on live television while the audience cheered on. But there's one woman in the background from day one that makes the ultimate bond with Richard, Dorene. She would become Richard's #1 girl over the years while the others fade away. And out of the story, Dorene makes a whole new story with Richard that is captured by the media when they marry in 1996. Dorene herself is not what many might think. She was a magazine editor, quite intelligent. She's mild-tempered, almost a sweetness to her, as she talks to the media about her marriage to Richard. The day that the two of them tie the knot is in October of '96. Dorene says she's relieved and just wants to enjoy the day, spending what little she can with Richard, her new husband, and then the rest of it with his family. Richard is spending the rest of his life in San Quentin State Prison in California when he becomes a married man. The newlyweds have been writing back and forth to one another for 11 years. Dorene says that she can't help the way the world looks at Richard and that they don't know him the way she does. She wears her wedding ring, showing it proudly. To many people's shock, Richard and Dorene somewhat keep their marriage private. At least Dorene does. It seems to be true love, at least for Dorene. Dorene keeps insisting that Richard is innocent. She speaks of his charm, his humor, his interests. She says that he's my buddy, my best friend. She also believes that Richard has stopped talking to other women for a moment, but it's later known that that's not really how it was. Many believe she knew it deep down. Dorene tries to see Richard 4 times a week, trying to be the first in line every day she can, before what Richard calls his friends would use up all of his daily visits. Dorene's personal life that Richard really didn't know of when it came to first-hand experience, the one she lived outside of prison that Richard couldn't be a part of, it was falling apart. Her family disowns her, wanting nothing to do with her or Richard, not wanting the Ramirez name attached to the family. She loses friends, and her career is jeopardized. Dorene wants children, making no secret about it, although it seems Richard has no desire to have any offspring. The two go years seeing one another as much as they can. Every time they're together, they take a picture. Through the years, they grow old, kissing and holding one another. Dorene even says that if Richard is ever executed, she would have to end her own life. That's how passionate her love was for Richard at that moment. It's really never clear in the end of why their marriage dissolved, but it is known that Dorene's belief that Richard was innocent would be her own undoing with their marriage. In 2009, evidence is brought to light about the murder of a 9-year-old girl that Richard is now proven to be the killer of. At that time, it makes massive headlines, and once again the Night Stalker case is tossed into the zeitgeist of day-to-day news. It must have been a hard blow for Dorene, that she couldn't take it, that she couldn't look away. Perhaps she confronted Richard about it. Richard's love life is filled with other women, writing him, sending him pictures, even while he's married. It truly never stops. His mailbox is always full. But in 2013, Richard is on his last breath. He's been dying from lymphoma. It takes his life while he's chained to a bed, suffering at 53. It's a sad and agonizing death. The once playboy of women, with unbelievable brutality attached to him, is no more. As for the reasoning of why women want a relationship with a killer, it can root off from many different elements. Maybe she has a history of trauma, wanting, needing, danger of a violent person in her life. Maybe it's the thought that she can be a savior. Maybe she's just manipulated by lust. Or perhaps it's much simpler. Having a relationship with someone you're attracted to that you don't have to endure every day with responsibilities from being a wife. It still goes on today with killers that have been convicted of terrible acts. We still have a culture that feeds and finds itself interested in darkness of men who are killers. But Richard's story is his own, and that's what makes it so appetizing to dig into. The love, the lust, the heartthrob that was Richard Ramirez.